Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and friends. I'm Naomi Koh, although most people know me as Nai. I'm, as Rachel mentioned, a year 2 senior at Tembusu College. And I'm also, per Article 1 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, disabled. For me, I have a profound hearing impairment. What that means is that if hearing is a sort of sliding scale, then mine is at the very worst end of it. Unaided, I can hear almost nothing except a jet plane. So what I wear to help me to hear is called cochlear implants. Cochlear implants are to deaf people what a prosthetic leg is to an amputee, and these are different from hearing aids. Because for hearing aids, as the name suggests, you need to have a residual degree of hearing in order to use them. So, cochlear implants work by translating sound waves into electrical impulses, which are then transmitted to my brain, and that's how I can hear for a given value of hear. Because for me, tonality and pitch are very different. When I tell people that I have this hearing problem, I get a range of reactions. They tend to be quite disbelieving, shall we say? So it ranges from, huh? Really? But you seem fine. And my personal favorite, but you can hear me now, we're talking. But I think that brings me to my main point, that there are preconceived notions about disability and in the specific deafness in society. However, I believe that I speak for a group of young deaf people when I say that the stereotypes are outdated. For me, I have never learned sign language. I can lip read, yes, but badly. I speak English, Chinese, and Malay. I used to play the violin when I was a child. Granted, I was so bad that my father would walk out of any room the minute the violin came in, but it's a thought that counts, and I played the violin. I have Spotify, I listen to YouTube. I really love the Try Guys and Lindsay Ellis right now. Shameless promotion, but yeah. I've been mainstreaming my whole life, and I'm currently in university where I don't have any form of access arrangements or extra aids in lectures or tutorials. Granted, I am part of a fortunate few. We have access to technology that significantly ameliorates the problems of being deaf. However, this does not change the fact that people are surprised because there are societal labels. And we as a society, not only do we tend to make assumptions about people, but we also tend to get confused when people do not fit the labels that we ascribe to them. For me, the labels tend to be either I'm a stereotypical disabled person in need of help, or I'm an inspirational story of overcoming the odds, or I'm a fully functioning, able-bodied person. But I think that these labels are not real, and none of them really can quite be used to describe who I am. And I would like to think that I am more real than that. I mean, I am mostly functioning. This year, as part of my regular checkup, I did a hearing test where it was found that aided, I could hear within the ranges of a normal human who could hear. Yeah, I can do most normal things. I can use the phone, I can talk to people, things like that. However, for me, tonality and pitch are very different. They just sort of slide away from me, all those high notes and low notes. So I can't carry a tune. And for this reason, I will never be around when my friends say, hey, you wanna go sing K? You wanna go karaoke? Nope. I'm away, I'm washing my hair. I'm going to avoid this until the day I die. Not only that, I can't quite hear the direction where sound's coming from. So if people come up behind me and they're like, Nai, I get really startled. And as a child, this was quite annoying because when you play blind man's bluff, but you can't hear where people are, yeah, you tend to be really bad at playing that. When I take off my aids for too long, I start slurring. I can't pick up unfamiliar accents very well, and in crowds and in noise, it's really hard to hear. But I tend to pretend that I can hear, even when I can't. So I developed as a child what I like to call my incongruous response habit, which was, looking back, clearly a very intelligent thing to do. So people would ask me a question, and because I couldn't make out the answer, I would come up with a response and just hope that it would be the correct response. So for instance, someone would be like, hey, would you like to have a meal today? And I'll be like, yeah, the weather is great today. I got a lot of weird looks as a child for that reason. But the reality of it is that I need help, even though I deny it very stringently. For instance, sometimes when I watch movies, I can't make out the accents or characters at all, and because my Chinese is bad, but subtitles are in Chinese, it doesn't help. So consequently, what I'll do is I'll go to the movie, and then afterwards I'll be sneakily pretending to text but Googling the synopsis, and then I'll be like, yeah, it was a great movie. I love Ryan Reynolds' performance in this. It was so good, and his abs, oh my god. Yeah. I also need help in other areas. For instance, because as mentioned, I do journalism in my school clubs. So for one time, I had to transcribe an interview that I was facilitating. And I told my editor, yeah, no problem, I'll get it to you. And then I listened to the transcript 7 times, and each time could not pick out a single word of what was going on. And then rather than tell my editor, maybe you could assign someone else to do this, I swallowed my pride and chose the next best option, which was to ask my mother for help. Inherently, this is, I think, a rather problematic thing, because I am deaf. I need help, and I sometimes, especially as I've grown up, I wonder, why do I pretend otherwise? And I think that it boils down to the idea of labeling, because for most of us, we don't really like or we really aspire to have certain labels placed on us. And for me, I personally am inherently very uncomfortable with the idea of being seen as disabled. And why is this so? I think that there are 2 things to it. And the first is very internal. Bluntly put, no one likes to be less than whole. And for me, my deafness is such an apparent condition, and it's unchangeable. I will be deaf for life. It's not something that I can change with yoga or exercise or positive thinking or studying more. I am deaf, and that's it, full stop. I think it also has to do with the context, because cochlear implants were actually invented in around the late 1970s to 1980s. But even then, the technology was still quite unused. So when I was born, which is 1998, people still weren't really sure what would happen to those who had cochlear implants, how it would affect our lives. They weren't sure whether we could live normal lives or whether we would even be able to hear. Would we be signing? No one knew, and it was really a great question. And when you are part of this great question, this great experiment, and this great debate, even as a child, you tend to internalize it. So since young, I think I've always tried to be better than hearing people. And I admit freely that this has led to me putting an overemphasis on performance as a metric for self-worth, which is very unhealthy. And this, for me, manifested in 2 ways. It manifested in pretending my problems don't exist, in pretending that everything was fine. But it also manifested in trying to find other ways to measure self-worth. And when I fell short of those expectations, it made me insecure, and it drove me to try to find more and more ways to measure my own self-worth. I'm afraid this is the part of the speech where I say that I have no solution to this. I'm still an insecure, neurotic individual. And this is, I presume, the part where people would expect something inspirational, some story, some inspirational statements from me, but I really don't have one. I think it's just about trying to live with yourself day to day. And this ties into my next point about why I hide my deafness. It's because I think the label of inspirational is one that I'm trying to avoid, and this goes back to the greater problem of labels in themselves. Granted, the labeling that I've been faced with has been largely intentional. It's not deliberate. I have been labeled as society, yes, and there are societal misconceptions or preconceptions, shall we say, with being deaf, but these are not intentionally harsh. I have not actually faced malicious bullying as a child for being deaf. Rather, it has more to do with societal conceptions of disability, which are more insidious. And consequently, I think that there is certain unwittingly, perhaps, shall we say, well-meaning but condescending attitudes that I have experienced and encountered. I'm sorry, because this is really something that I struggle to articulate even today. So bear with me if I can't find the right words to explain this. So I think that people tend to react with surprise when they find that I'm doing well, because it's in contrast to their perception of what a disabled person or a deaf person looks like. And as a result, when they respond to me, they tell me, oh, you're doing well, or you're amazing, and things like that. And it's a sort of backhanded compliment. So it's for me, when I hear people say things like that, it sort of feels a bit like, oh, you're doing really well despite being you. And when I compound this with my own neurosis, my own insecurities, it becomes even harder to deal with. I think it's a sort of catch-22 problem of praise. Because for me, praise affirms me and tells me that I am normal, despite my disability. But yet, at the same time, the very fact that I receive praise is precisely because of my disability. So consequently, it feels like it's a label I can never outrun. Or worse, it sometimes makes me feel uncomfortable because this praise is something that I don't deserve. I think this is especially strong because when I go back to my old hospital, and sometimes I give talks and things to parents of deaf children, and I tell them about my own life experiences, and they tend to say things like, "Oh, you're very inspirational," and "Thank you." And I think that this is very undeserved, because for me, technology has significantly reduced the struggles of being deaf. I am not Beethoven. I am not the second coming of Helen Keller. I am none of these, because my problems are more of minor annoyances and minor grievances. And I don't think that I am especially wonderful or especially amazing. And honestly, if you would like to find inspirational people, people who have truly overcome immense odds, there are other people out there, and I'm not one of them. So please, you should save your admiration for people who deserve it. So in sum, if there's a takeaway from this night, I think I would like it to be that we shouldn't label people because of their issues or conditions, because it's not a very nice thing to do. And I personally wish that I am not defined by being deaf, and I also don't really wish to be a symbol of that either. Yeah. But sometimes I will need help. Sometimes I will not hear you correctly, or maybe I'll come up with some really weird responses to what you're saying, or I'll just be zoning out of it. And in such a situation, when I ask you to repeat your words, or when I appear a little slow on the uptake, I ask for your understanding. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much we all try, the fact of the matter is that it is immutable, and that I am deaf, and I will need help. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it's my hope and the hope of others like me that we see people as people and not labels. Thank you.